What's all the fighting about? Why do we get drawn into conflicts? Why do we just sort of reenact these scripts over and over and over again? So, two friends serve as a great example for this. So the first is a very functional and intelligent and respectable person. But if she gets a phone call from her mother within 2 minutes, screaming every single time, and she's off kilter the rest of the day. Because you can tell that it's not really over anything specific, because that it's always the temperature of the conversation. It's always the inevitable conclusion. So it's not situational, it seems to be systemic. And then I think of, my friend, he gets in a fight with his girlfriend, and, it's not even necessarily a screaming match. It's just sort of ordinary conflict. And his girlfriend will shut down, like she'll become sort of catatonic. She'll dissociate. And that just sort of ends the conversation, because he's not a monster, so he's not going to keep pursuing somebody that's obviously having an emotional reaction. There's an attempt to work through it. And in the process of working through it, we talk about it. And I remember the first time that he said this, my immediate reaction was like, oh, how unbelievably convenient that the minute that things are getting heated and you might win, or she might have to be held responsible to something, she has this way to shut everything down. Very, very convenient. And then I'm thinking, maybe I should just have him phone my dad, because that is precisely what he would say. That was precisely his relational schema, in a sense. Now, in a redemptive and ironic move for my father, he is also the one that taught me that conflicts will always be the worst between people that are the closest, because there's real stakes there. There's a real valence. There's a real charge to it. And it also confronts all feelings and of intimacy and the fear thereof and inadequacy and just, all that you, because someone who is like you can see within you a lot more than you're comfortable with, and vice versa. And people have a struggle with interiority and dealing with it, because to expose yourself is to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable is to be at risk of getting hurt. And, it's a very understandable fear, and it's something that should be revered. And one of the many risks of being loquacious or philosophically informed, or to just have the gift of gab in philosophy, is that it's a lot like with psychiatrists, where they have sort of a conflict or a quandary about treating narcissists and people with borderline personality disorder and so on. That is that when you teach people the language of truth, you also teach them to lie better. Because every idea is essentially a dialectic, and if it's stripped of its necessary shadow, you can sort of transmit all these green flags that appear to be integration and appear to be truth and have the language of truth. And for most people, sort of, pass the anthogenic test of truth, but indeed are worse, because it is often a convenient truth smuggled in through an inconvenient one. And it's a huge risk. And it's also, in relationships, I tend to think, well, what are the ones that hurt me and what are the ones that healed me? And it's always the ones that were collaborative. They were always the ones where each other's interiority was found together. And if you have the ability to map people psychologically and to tease out their motivations and to have an understanding of incentives, well, much like mistaking understanding for competency, you understand this investigative and architectural aware way of seeing as true insight. And that is a massive danger for you and everyone around you. And what is it that actually causes there to be collaboration versus the scripting thing? And, that is essentially to catch yourself as you're engaging in these sort of fear-based and reflexive ideas, and these fear-based and reflexive conversational tactics. I was talking with someone about what is essentially the struggle of assuming that the prettiest girl in the room is also the deepest. And sort of struggling with that because it feels like a non-objective way to go about in the world. And it feels like you're fooling yourself and you're fooling other people and you're not being authentic to something. Well, I mean, what I would say is, first of all, attractive women are everywhere. The streets are littered with them. I mean, even if it's like 1 in 10, 1 in 20, that fraction of 7 billion people is a lot of folks. And also, you know, if you don't go for like, our mutual gaze is what keeps us going. It is literally what keeps us going. So, I mean, if you just want to avoid the romantic charge, have fun being right and being extinct. Have fun being right. You will not exist. And I think that it is a convenient narrative to think that, oh, we're just going for basal attractiveness. And it's, you know, with women, it's just like you're just trying to find the guy that's making the most money regardless of how that happens. And with men, you're trying to find the hottest woman, no matter how that happens, no matter who she is. And we both know that that is tremendously unfair to either of us. And that is not true. Nobody believes that. So to respond to each, I would just say that in terms of this collaborative exploration, this sort of mutual understanding of one another's interiority, what makes women really attractive is their dedication to truth and beauty, no matter what the cost. Like they will go towards it despite reputation. They will go towards it despite, you know, popularity and convenience, because if you're going to trust somebody with your heart and mind and soul, you want to make sure that they actually have a strong moral and ethical desire to not be evil, to actually always be aiming towards the truest and most beautiful thing. And they can't tolerate being abusive or being overriding or being tyrannical. It's just, it's not within them. And that is the most important thing, because, you know, you as a grown person, you have your defenses, but then you think, well, I mean, the children, which, you know, we never really stop being, in a sense. It's whenever somebody says something is childish, I think, well, you just hate children then, because a child is just you stripped of experience and wisdom, but they still have all the same emotions. So don't insult children by calling anybody childish and making that an epithet. But here we are, where it's the preservation of yourself, but it's also the ability to nurture. And it's actually somewhat terrifying, because, like, you know, attractive women come and go. Like, they're always around you. And the real oh shit moment is like, oh no, she actually has a soul. This is going to be something. This it just has an effect to ignite. And again, it's what keeps us all going. So by all means, embrace it. And with men, this idea of just providership at any cost. Well, I mean, you know, in defense of like real integrated sentimental women that, you know, always are going towards truth and beauty, I can tell you that I know people that are in love, like true enviable love, and the way that they treat their partners is to say that they admire the attempt. It is not the aggregate amount that they bring in. It is the fact that they are trying, and they're doing so honestly, and they're doing so without being violent in the world. They are not, you know, overwriting or exploiting other people. Because again, they have a sense of like, it always comes back to children. And I understand providership is one thing, but at what cost? And that cost will always come to your kid. You know, you don't have a father because he's working all the time, just chasing cash, without really having an understanding about what it's actually all about, what it's all supposed to be for. You know, I understand that I speak about relationships a lot, and it's a fair thing to wonder what the fixation is. And so what I'll say is, when I was 20 and I'm realizing that the political sphere offers no real answers. They can't really explain anything to me in a coherent way. They can't. There's all these unanswered questions, and there's so many of these sort of like, oh, don't think about it. Don't like stop your line of inquiry. It's stupid to do so. Just enough. It's impractical. Now, I find libertarianism that explains, and as I have explained in great detail, all these things about peace and accountability and being able to proceed in the world and just all the human flourishing that freedom allows. But it seemed kind of bloodless. It seemed like, I understand, like, frivolous goods are produced and are so at a market clearing price and coordination and money and everything, but that's not what really keeps me up at night. And I don't want this to be, just free association philosophy that fucks, but the reason that it's so important is because in that pursuit of trying to find truth, like the deepest layer of it, you would have to go for motivation, and you would have to go for what keeps you alive, and what causes growth and catharsis, and what are the things that are catalytic to this sort of approach of a happy person that has presence. And that's what it comes down to. And so it would seem to me very important to make sure that relationships are given as much attention as the political, are given as much attention as the questions of the infinite and the questions of the self. And that is why they're sort of chained together and they're all reasoned together, is because if you're just aiming for the truest thing, that orientation has to be towards the truest thing, regardless of how uncomfortable it is. And then when I think about these conflicts between all the different layers, I just think people really can just be two parallel lines, never touching, but just going on for infinity. And people can get close, but then as they get closer, it's almost like two magnets where opposing forces are just repulsion, 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 repulsion. And then once you get over that last little bit, then they click together. And that the way that the resistance and the force increases logarithmically, the closer and closer you get where you think that it's almost impossible. I mean, that is the love of your enemies. And that is finding who can actually help you find yourself, because it is not a solo expedition. It never has been. I mean, human beings are not wired for that in any sense. It's deontologically inconsistent. We're not lone wolves. We're not. There are no sort of leaders without collaboration. And so to end this one on a poetic note, I thought of a line that was, with infinity's black inkwell, she scribes the line between heaven and hell.